All right, welcome everyone to MAREA, Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association. This is our first presentation of the year. Tonight's presentation, which you should know, is on rain gardens, and I think it'll be a very interesting presentation. So for those that don't know, MAREA is the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Association. We put on monthly educational seminars, such as what you're going to see tonight, and on a range of topics on renewable energy and sustainable living. So what's coming up in February, we have a presentation by Tammy Shimp from Berks Nature entitled, "How Can You Help the Environment?" And the question is, what do trees, gutters, rain gardens, and manure all have in common? I don't know the answer, so we'll have to watch next month to find out. But what this is an introduction to Berks Nature's effective practices that you can apply in 2024. And there's a focus on native trees, and you'll learn about native tree benefits, where planting is occurring. Berks Nature runs programs to plant trees, their recipe for tree success, and also opportunities for anyone to volunteer, at least in that area. Then coming up in March, we have a presentation on fuel cells. April is advanced battery technology. May is perhaps tentatively offshore wind. We'll get an update on a speaker we had a year or two ago. So a lot coming up. Tonight, Chuck will present our speakers.
It's my real pleasure to introduce Jodi Sulpizio. She is a natural resources educator from Penn State Extension and coordinates the Master Watershed Steward Program and the Spongy Moth Program in York County. She provides education to the community on water quality issues related to private drinking water supplies, stormwater management, and watershed health. Additionally, she enjoys managing stewards as they plan and implement best management practices, monitor streams, participate in citizen science projects, and educate the community about water resources. She graduated from Penn State University with a BS degree in environmental resource management with a focus on water resources and is currently studying to obtain a master's degree in community and economic development at Penn State. To say it mildly, Jodi is passionate about empowering both citizens and volunteers to protect environmental resources, and we are so privileged to have her give this lecture tonight on how you can build rain gardens and be good stewards of our limited and dwindling water resources. In addition to Jodi, we also have Beth Yount, who is Jodi's counterpart in the Master Waterworks environment in the Philadelphia area. She provides education about watershed health, safe drinking water, stormwater management, conservation practices, and sustainability soil stewardship. She focuses her work in the Philadelphia area on adapting and implementing best management practices in heavily developed areas and educating residents about habitat management and protection of water ecosystems and watersheds in the downstream environment. She has a master's in soil science from University of California, Davis, and a master's in sustainable engineering from Villanova University. And I suspect that at some point Beth walked by my office at Villanova when she was studying the sustainable engineering. It's a real pleasure to recognize and introduce both of you wonderful people, stewards of our environment, and we're very much looking forward to Jodi's talk and Beth's contributions in the Q&A. So without that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Jodi, and it's all yours, Jodi.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Chuck. Thanks to Beth for helping out with question and answers. She knows so much about soil. If you have soil questions as we go through the talk tonight, we'll get to questions at the very end, but Beth is very knowledgeable in the soil world, among stormwater and other things. So tonight we are going to be talking about rain gardens. And first, I have to say I'm super excited that there's this many people who are interested in learning more about rain gardens. I want to talk a little bit about Extension. You maybe are not familiar with Extension, but we are part of Penn State University, and we believe that all people should have access to science-based education. So who are we? We're an arm of the university that actually is a collection of educators and associates doing. We want community members to be able to put that knowledge to use. So we're out there doing educational programs in the community. We do a lot of online webinars. We handle a lot of one-on-one questions, and you'll find us at community events. As Master Watershed Stewards, we're out there in the community doing clean water projects and educating the community about our water resources. So areas that Extension covers are listed here. I won't go over all of them. You're probably familiar with 4-H, our big youth program, and you may be familiar with horticulture if you've heard of our Master Gardener program. The Master Watershed Stewards that Beth and I coordinate are part of the agronomy and natural resources team with Extension. So tonight, I'm going to go over these main topics. I'm going to talk a little bit about stormwater, but I suspect if you're attending the webinar tonight, you already know a fair amount about stormwater. So our main focus is going to be on rain gardens and designing and constructing them. We'll talk a little bit about plant selection and maintenance, which is a key to success. And then I'll have some resources that we have available that you could use to help you as you're implementing BMPs, maybe at your home or in the community, and then we'll end with questions after I'm done with the presentation. So what is stormwater? So stormwater is rainwater, snowmelt that doesn't infiltrate into the ground. So it's flowing across the land. It's going to go right across impervious surfaces like you see here in this parking lot. It's also draining. There's runoff coming from the lawn and the fields surrounding this parking lot. So it's going into storm drains, into our local streams, rivers, and lakes. Stormwater, we're all responsible for stormwater, I feel. Stormwater impacts our waterways. And if you think about where you get your drinking water, you're either getting it from your public water supply, which is either coming from a reservoir, which is coming from a lake or a river, or you're getting it from the groundwater. So water is always recycled. There is no new water on Earth. It's continually going through the water cycle. So anytime pollutants are picked up in stormwater, they're going to be in that stormwater unless they're removed in some kind of process. So we have residential runoff in this graphic and urban runoff. So different things that are on our lawns and on the impervious surfaces that can be picked up by stormwater would be oil, gas, any chemicals that might be coming from cars. A big one from lawns is fertilizer, obviously agricultural fields too, but pesticides. One that's not on this list that we're really starting to study more are road salts. And then, of course, with the urban runoff, you have more industrial waste. If you have point source pollution, could be different things coming out of pipes that would be more specific types of pollution. So the historic approach to stormwater was really to move water off the site as quickly as possible. So maybe you've heard of like grayscaping, a lot of concrete pathways. Fast-moving water can really increase flooding, but the current philosophy and what we're here to talk about more tonight is reducing stormwater flow by using green infrastructure practices that will increase infiltration. So that could be constructing a rain garden, planting a riparian buffer, using a rain barrel at your home, planting a meadow, maybe replacing part of your lawn with meadow habitat, or naturalizing some type of retention basin or detention basin. So what are the results of increased stormwater? I think we all kind of know what what the results of increased stormwater can be. Obviously, increased flooding, more erosion with that flooding. That's going to add a lot of silt to our waterways, and sediment is one of our biggest forms of pollution. That's going to alter our aquatic habitat. It's going to increase the cost of water treatment for that water that's coming out of your faucet. It's going to decrease the groundwater recharge. If all of the water is flowing into our streams and rivers, we're not having as much recharging that groundwater supply, which is really important. Transporting of pollutants to water, which we already talked about, and all of these things can be threats or add threats to human health. So, I'm here in York County, and I know that you're probably all across the state here, maybe even some other states, but we've noticed an increase in more flash floods, especially here where I live. 2 years ago, we had 4 6-inch rainstorms in the month of September. So we had severe flash flooding in York County. But then I think with climate change, we're seeing that it's more frequent to have more flash floods, and that's all going to add more erosion, more pollutants to our waterways. So what can we do? I feel like we all can make a difference. We all use a community. So even if you don't have a lot of impervious surface, maybe at your home, or maybe you live in an apartment and you don't have a lot of land around you, you use a community. And there's a lot of impervious surfaces in a community. So I feel like we can all do our part, whether it's making changes at home or simply helping out a community group or organization to implement change and to implement some of these best management practices. So best management practices, BMPs, they're basically physical devices or a change in behavior that will help to control the volume, rate, or quality of stormwater runoff. So I already mentioned some of these, but some simple best management practices that you could do around the home or around your community is a downspout disconnect, letting that you don't want to discharge the spouting water right into a roadway, maybe into a garden. Rain barrels. Tonight we're going to focus on rain gardens. Riparian buffers, which are streamside plantings. Cleaning up the dog or animal waste in your yard. Green impervious driveways. They may be a little bit more expensive or more difficult to implement, but it is possible. And also properly disposing of hazardous household items. So I just wanted to show you some pictures of some different practices. So in the upper left-hand corner, we have parking grid pavers. If you were going to add an extra parking space to your home, perhaps you could not use all concrete or macadam, and you could use some type of paver device like this. The second picture at the top, that's actually a green roof. That's the law building up at Penn State's main campus. Again, that's a bit more difficult to implement, and that's not something you can put on every building or if it's not built to withstand that green roof. But as more buildings are being built, more of these practices are being put in place, and it's really important that they're done correctly so that there are not a lot of problems that come with. On the lower right there, we have a curbside rain garden, and that's up at In-State College. It's kind of a linear rain garden there down along College Avenue. In the middle there, we have a naturalized basin at a hospital in York County. And then below that is a newly planted riparian buffer. So you can see all the willows growing up on that stream side. And that stream at one time had severe cut banks. So it's really nice to see that the trees growing in so heavily there. And then rain barrels. So these would all be examples of things that can be implemented to help reduce stormwater runoff. But tonight, our focus is rain gardens. So what is a rain garden? So I'm going to call them a landscaped shallow depression type of garden rather than a bowl-shaped garden. But it's used to capture water, allowing it to soak into the ground. So they could drain water from a roof downspout, from your driveway or walkway, or any other type of impervious surface. And the goal of putting in a rain garden is to slow and reduce the amount of runoff from your property while adding a lovely garden feature that reaps many benefits. The benefits would be flood reduction, pollutant removal, groundwater protection, enhanced wildlife habitat, and I think improved aesthetics. So it's nice to look at, and you get all kinds of pollinators and birds, visitors to the rain garden. So I'm going to share with you a couple different styles of rain gardens, if you want to call it. You could be really creative and really make the rain garden a garden that you enjoy, that has all of the qualities and benefits that you might like. So the top left is a rain garden that we planted in the city of York. So it's capturing runoff from a nearby parking lot and a street before it goes down the hill to the Cadorus Creek. The next rain garden on the right has some woody vegetation. So you see some trees there. That's at Stroudwater Research Center. And then the bottom left, again, that's a different rain garden at Stroud, but you can see the trees and shrubs that they put in that rain garden. And then the one on the right is a rain garden that's capturing runoff from the roof of a municipal building. Top left here, this rain garden is on a farm. So it's just a shallow depression capturing runoff there in the yard. The top right photo is a municipal park, and that's more like a curb cutout type rain garden. That had a few drainage issues, which we're going to talk about drainage, some things we learned with that rain garden. And the bottom left, that's up at main campus at Penn State. That's a bit of a more manicured rain garden. Definitely not all native plants there, but it's better than an impervious surface, right? Or mowed lawn. And then the bottom right there is a native native plants at a rain garden at a park here in York County. So a few things before you get started. You want to really carefully consider a few things before you get started on a rain garden plan. So you want to determine your goals. So what is the goal of the rain garden? You know, what water are you trying to capture? What overall benefit do you want to have mostly by putting in the rain garden? You want to set a budget, maybe look at the cost of plants ahead of time, because if it's going to be a really, really big space, you have to be able to plan for those plants. And then the design of the garden, if that's not something you feel comfortable with, there's a lot of resources online, and maybe even some master gardeners or watershed stewards would be able to help you with some type of a design. And plant selection, we have some resources that can help with plant selection. I'm going to go into more detail about that. Develop a strategy, you know, how is it going to be constructed? How will the planting go? And then you want to make a maintenance plan too. The garden is not going to succeed without maintenance. So that's a very important part of any rain garden project that you're going to do. So first you want to think about the location. So you don't want to plant a garden that you could end up creating problems by doing so. So you really want to look at the topography of the area. Take a walk on a rainy day around, look at and study the water flow on your property. This was a rain garden that we were going to plant in the city of York. It had rained a lot, so that's why it's full of water, but it's really important to go out there and see how quickly is that ponded water going to drain. Because if that area does not drain, and I'm going to talk more about this, it's not a suitable place for a rain garden. So you want to study that water on the property on a rainy day. look for low flat areas, and you want to look for no more of a slope than 10 to 12%. You can choose a location that gets runoff from a roof, a downspout, or impervious surface. You also want to ask your municipality, if you're doing this at your house, make sure that it's approved and you don't, expend all this money and time creating a garden that they don't want 6 foot tall Joe Pye weed and they're going to make you cut it down. So you want to check the ordinances that you do have in your municipality before you get started. And again, you're not going to want to build where the water ponds and stays wet for a long, long time. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is you don't want to plant rain gardens under trees. Trees are doing an important function, and you're not going to be wanting to dig into those tree roots. So I would, let those trees be and then maybe plant your rain garden somewhere else. And you definitely don't want to plant over utilities, which I have a slide later on more about that. So let's see, I'm going to go on. So also location, make sure again that you're watching the flow of the water, and you're going to want to plan when you're thinking about plant selection, you're going to want to observe and look at the different zones of the rain garden as you're selecting your plants, because some plants cannot tolerate being inundated. Plants up on the drier zones are going to have very dry feet, so they're, you really have to select plants based on how much water they're going to be exposed to. Again, and I'm going to talk more about plant selection and the zones of a rain garden here in a little bit. But also with location, this was the one rain garden that I showed a picture of next to a municipal building. It should be constructed at least 10 feet from the foundation. So you don't want to plant too close to the foundation and cause a water issue in your basement. So make sure you do plan for that. Let a berm there. You can see here a berm of grass and mulch against the building. If you do end up planting, really close to your house, you might have to have an under drain in the rain garden so that you're not getting a flooded basement. If you have a septic system, you should plant 50 feet from that septic system. And if you have a well, we suggest that you plant 100 feet from the well. So before you dig, make sure that you do call 811. So that is the number that you can call where they can come out, and it's called PA One Call, but they'll come out. I did it this past year. They come out and mark all of your utilities. So make sure you do that. Again, avoiding tree roots and any type of engineered stormwater management structure that may already be in place. I would not recommend putting a rain garden where that has already been constructed. Know your soil. So know your soil type. Penn State does have soil testing. We have test kits at all of our extension offices, and every county in Pennsylvania has an extension office. So the site must have good drainage or the rain garden is going to fail. So you want to avoid areas that are permanently waterlogged. And once constructed, ponding depth should be less than 12 inches. So this is not a real deep garden. 12 inches max is what we would say. 4 to 8 inches would be best. And water should drain from the site, preferably in less than 24 hours after a rain event. Drainage in 2 to 4 hours is preferred. So you can do a percolation test, and perk tests are pretty easy to do. So it's pretty easy. If you just Google how to do a perk test yourself, you can do that. But you want to do a perk test just to ensure adequate drainage. So if the site doesn't drain well, it might need some amended soils. But I'll give a few guidelines for a perk test. So let's say dig a hole about 12 inches deep, fill it with water and let that sit overnight. And then the next day, what you could do is put something across that hole, whether it's a stick or a measuring stick, a string, whatever, and you're going to fill that water or fill the hole with water the next day. And then every hour you should go out and measure how the depth of the water. So you can see how quickly is it draining every hour. So typically 1 to 1.5 inches per hour is a decent percolation rate. It shouldn't be much less than that. And you also don't want it to be much greater than that. So if it's too fast, and let's say it's draining like 4 inches per hour, that's not a really ideal place for a rain garden. But less than 1 to 1.5 inches per hour may not be ideal either. So ideally, you definitely don't want to have standing water after 72 hours because then you may have mosquito issues, but it should definitely 24 hours is recommended. So how do you determine the size of your rain garden? It's important to put the rain garden where it will collect as much runoff as possible. So if you're directing a downspout into the garden, there's a pretty simple calculation you can use, and I'm going to go through that on the next slide. We're going to go back to math class. So you're going to measure the footprint of your house, estimate how much the roof area is actually draining into the downspout that you're directing into your rain garden, and then you're going to divide that area by 6. So the size of the garden you want to make, this size is the garden actually to hold 1 inch of roof runoff in the garden that is 6 inches deep. So that's what we're going to plan for. So I want to give a shout out to Penn State's Rob Burgage, who has helped with these calculations. I have used some of the information from one of his PowerPoints here just to really walk you through the calculations. So you might want to take a little picture of this if you're thinking about constructing a rain garden. So first, this is a hypothetical residential rain garden. So we're going to use an impervious roof area to be drained that's 50 feet by 12.5 feet. So we're going to multiply that 50 by 12.5 to get the area of 625 square feet. So if we're designing for a 1-inch rain event, then a 1-inch rain is actually 1/12 of a foot. So it's 0.83 feet of rain. So the total volume from that 1-inch rain event is then 625 square feet times the 0.083 feet. So that will give you 52 cubic feet of water that your garden has to be able to hold. So if we're going to use a 6-inch ponding depth, a rain garden can store 1/2 foot of water for each square foot of rain garden surface. So 52 cubic feet divided by 0.5 feet is going to equal 104 square feet. So that's how big your rain garden should be for that area. Again, that's for a 1-inch rain event, which is pretty common in the state of Pennsylvania. However, if you would like to design for a bigger storm event, let's say a 5-inch storm event, I'm not going to read through all these calculations again, but we have the precipitation of 5 inches being 5/12. So you can see the conversion there for precipitation that you would replace from the 1-inch event for this 5-inch event. So you're going to see at the very end, when you go through the math, that the area of the rain garden then needs to be 519 square feet, which is much, much larger than if you're planning for a 1-inch rain event. So, it doesn't seem quite feasible to plan a garden for a storm that doesn't come as often. Just keep that in mind when you're doing your calculations and sizing the rain garden. So you may have questions on that. If you want, maybe I can send the calculations out to you if you weren't able to write that down or take a picture. So just keep that in mind. It's really, really important to get an accurate size for your garden so it doesn't fail. So I talk a little bit more about construction of the rain garden. So first, you're going to want to kill the grass in some way. So there's a lot of different options for killing the grass. And I think I'm gonna talk about that more a little bit later. But when you do that, you want to really try to limit the disturbance to the subsoil. You don't want to disturb those soils a whole lot. You can line that garden if desired. You don't need to line rain gardens. I've never done that with the rain gardens that we've had or that we've created here in York County with the Master Watershed Steward Program. Again, I'm not an engineer, but if the soil is draining well and it's percolating well, then you don't have to do any kind of under drain or any kind of lining. You can add a gravel storage bed or under drain if needed, amending the soils if needed, and then plant watering may be necessary to promote the establishment, and then installing mulch. And I'm going to talk more about these as we go. So construction. So the typical depth is 3 to 8 inches. Again, it's not a real deep garden. So don't think of it as a really big depression or big bowl shape. Think of it more of a depression in the yard. So if this is where it's important to know your soil type. So if it's a sandy soil, you may want to make it a little deeper and make the garden about 8 inches deep is what's recommended. If it's a silty soil, about 6 inches deep, and if it's a clay soil, about 3 inches deep. Now, again, I don't like to call it a bowl shaped because it has to be flat at the base. Okay, so the bottom should be flattened. If you do have to put amendments in, we recommend that 3 inches deep of amendments is sufficient. Gradual slope should be no greater than the slope should be no greater than a 3-to-1 ratio. And then if you are going to mulch the garden, we recommend that you don't use the dyed mulch. You could use wood chips or compost of some sort, like I would say like a leaf mulch. But we wouldn't recommend the dyed mulch. And then a maximum of 3-inch depth of the mulch, and then an inlet and an outlet of the garden. So water coming in is dissipated. Maybe you can see in this picture, the rocks back there where the spouting is coming in. The rocks are going to slow the velocity of the runoff into the garden. And then an overflow. Each garden should have an overflow for when we do get those 5-inch rainstorms. You want that water to be able to flow out of the garden. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about, when we talked about mulch, one thing I didn't mention, if you're going to use mulch, think twice about getting mulch from like a municipal source where it's free. Free mulch is nice, but when you're getting mulch that's coming from the community and everyone takes their, yard clippings and yard waste to be mulched, you could get a whole new seed source in your garden of unwanted things that you don't want there. So think twice before you do use a mulch source like that. And we do not recommend that you mulch after that first year of planting. You may just need to fill in at times, like bare spots, but you don't have to mulch the rain garden every year. So if there's a slope at the rain garden site, you're going to have to determine the slope or possibly even excavate the area to provide for a relatively level ponding area, like you were calculating when you were sizing the rain garden. So to determine the slope, it's pretty easy. I've had volunteers go out and do this. Place a stake uphill, attach a string to the stake, and move downhill, move 10 feet downhill, downslope, put another stake into the ground, and then attach a string to the 2 stakes so that the string is level. So then you're going to measure the distance from the string on the downhill stake to the ground. The slope will be the height of the string divided by the length times 100. So there's another little bit of math calculation for you there. In this example, there's a 10% slope, which is okay, but remember that slopes in excess of 10 to 12% should be avoided. You don't want to build a rain garden on any steeper sloped area than that. So in this example with a 10% slope and a 6-inch ponding depth for a 104 square foot garden, we would excavate to provide an area of 104 square feet at the same ponding depth with a downslope berm constructed to be 6 inches high at the outlet. So I hope that makes sense. So when constructing a rain garden on a slope, make sure that the slopes on the edge of the garden are as gentle as possible. The steep slopes are difficult to maintain. You see those perhaps in some municipal like stormwater basins already. Those can be hard to maintain in a development. They can look unattractive and unnatural. So if you're doing just a rain garden, you want to try to make it as natural looking as possible. Try to keep the slopes again at a maximum of 3-to-1 ratio. So in this example, we have a 6-inch tall berm. At the outlet on the bottom of the berm should be at least 18 inches from the top. Then if the garden is 10 feet wide, the upslope edge is 1 foot plus 6-inch ponding depth of 1.5 feet from the surface of the rain garden. So the top slope should be about 4.5 feet from the bottom. So that's kind of confusing maybe, but really think about it if it's a slope. And we did plant a rain garden on a slope where we constructed one. I knew it was undersized based on the runoff that we were getting. There was just no way we could make it big enough. So we had to put in check dams and berms and then a pretty big overflow on the back berm because I knew it would be overflowing in a big rainstorm. So of course, the week that we had it constructed, it was that year that we got this 4 6-inch rainstorms in September. That's when we built this rain garden. So it really was put to the test that month and had a lot of damage that first week, but it survived and it's a thriving rain garden right now. So planting the rain garden. So before you plant, maybe outline the shape of your rain garden. You could use paint to do that. You could use string. You want to remove or kill the turf grass and then dig the rain garden to the desired depth. So how are you going to remove the turf? It's totally your choice how you're going to do this. I'm going to give you some recommendations. You could remove it by hand. That is the best way. To have as little impact on the soil as possible is to remove by hand. You could use a sod remover. It depends on the space that you're going to plant, but think about a few things. If you're going to use a sod remover, think about the cost of renting that, and also think about the disposal of the sod. What are you going to do with it once you cut it and have it all on your property there? Can you remove that? Tilling is not recommended. Tilling, you're going to be just tilling up a whole nother seed bank. So we don't recommend that you do tilling. And of course, there's chemical. You could use herbicides to kill the sod. And I'm not totally against herbicides. I know some people are, but I encourage people to look at it as a tool that you can use to create something greater and better. So, you're going to use that chemical maybe at first, but you're going to have all this wonderful vegetation in which will have many, many benefits in the long run. So again, it's totally up to you what your method would be to remove that sod. If when you're digging and you want to dig that depression, remove that topsoil and keep it. Okay, so if you're going to dig that depression, let's say you're going to make it 6 inches deep or 8 inches deep. Save that topsoil, dig deep enough that you can put that topsoil back. Topsoil is very precious and you want to reuse that. Again, if the garden's on a slope, a berm should be built on that downhill side, and then you want to have an overflow or small indentation should be added on that berm so that excess water can flow out of the garden during a large storm event. You want to protect that overflow area then either with rock or maybe erosion control netting or matting, some type of rock or gravel to hold that berm in place. So you want to consider about how the water is getting into the garden and also out when the storms exceed the capacity here. So there's a lot of different designs for inlets and outlets of rain gardens. You could Google that, look at a whole variety of pictures for different ideas as you're doing your design. Just in all cases, you just need to remember that flowing water has a lot of energy and can really cause a lot of erosion. So think about that when you are doing your design. You definitely don't want to have a failure of a garden based on the inlet into the garden. In this garden here, you can see on the left that the inlet's coming from the spouting, and they have lined that heavily with stone. And then the one on the right, there is a curb cut out. And then those pavers there would be slowing the water as it enters or leaves the garden. And in some cases, it might be necessary to actually pipe the stormwater runoff into the garden. So on the left, that is at the very top of the garden photo there, you can see there's a pipe entering the garden. And then that is lined with landscape fabric and rock. And that will help to dissipate that energy as the stormwater, and that's coming from a big parking lot in a park. And then over there on the right, this was the one rain garden that I had said we constructed on a hill kind of and had to build berms. We knew it was going to be collecting a lot of stormwater from the road beside the garden. So we put in large rock, and we also have pavers in there to really slow that water down as it's flowing into the garden. Now it's working, but you have to keep in mind that sediment is going to fill in those rocks. So you have to be able to unclog or get the debris out of the rocks. And when you have an entrance like we have on this one on the right, it can be a lot of work to try to get that sediment removed. So think about access to clean out, things like that as you're planning your design. And then here are some different outlet structures. You can see the municipal building up here in the top photo. The overflow is the rocks there where the woman is bent down there planting. And then you also might have a pipe that's actually going to take water into an outlet structure, and that's going to take the water into a stormwater system, which will be discharged into a creek. So a rain garden is actually more beneficial or helps with water quality more if it does not have an under drain. Sometimes you need that based on the volume of water that is being collected there. But if there is an under drain or there's pipes in it, that water is going to go into a stormwater system. So it's not going to infiltrate and recharge the groundwater as much or filter the water as it's moving through the vegetation there. So just some different things for you to think about as you're constructing your gardens. So choosing plants. I'm going to talk a lot about, choosing plants as you're planning your rain garden. We could do a whole webinar just on plants. But like any other garden, to be successful, you really need to know the site, right? So you need to know what are the light conditions. How much sun is the garden receiving? How much shade is there? What is the soil type? Like we already talked about. Is it heavy clay? Is it a sandy soil? That makes a big difference in the type of plants that you're going to pick. And what is the moisture, which we'll talk about that shortly. But then aesthetics are very important. Where is the garden going to be located? Is it going to be in your front yard where you maybe need to have shorter plants? That's all part of the planning process. Is the garden in a place where you can have really tall plants and wild looking plants? What are your preferences in texture and color? Those are all things to consider as you're choosing plants. So again, these are things that I already pretty much talked about. We definitely recommend choosing native plants based on the soil in your area. Again, sunlight and location of the garden, and selecting plants, have fun with it. Have different shapes, different colors, different bloom times. You don't want all of your plants blooming in the early spring and then have no color going into the fall. So think about that. Think about the wildlife that you want to attract. What pollinators are you interested in attracting to your yard? Natives, using native plants are just so beneficial for good wildlife habitat. They really support our native insect populations, definitely provide native birds with food that they need, along with other animals like amphibians, reptiles, small mammals. So think about that. Also, native plants are more drought tolerant than some of the non-natives, and they're also more resistant to pests. So it could be easier to maintain that garden if you use natives. So here's just some pictures of some different native plants that you can use. Again, thinking about the color, thinking about the texture, the timing of their bloom, and again, the pollinators that you want to attract. So it's important. I talked about not having plants blooming all at the same time. So it's really important to have a succession of bloom, to not just for your own aesthetics, but just to benefit wildlife in general, and then just provide a full all seasons of interest in your garden. So I wanted to show, if you've attended webinars about native plants, you've probably seen a diagram like this, just really showing the root structure of native plants. When you look at turf grass and where the red arrow is in the very left-hand side of the image, the roots are so shallow. But if you put in the native plants, the native grasses and perennials, you'll see how far down those roots go into the ground, and really shows, one, how they anchor the soil in place, and two, how it really creates a pathway for water to percolate down into the soil. Very beneficial, and the plants also help to take up pollutants and nutrients that are coming through the stormwater systems. So choosing plants, again, I said a lot of this already, but deeper roots, absorbing more water. There's really no need to fertilize the natives, not much need for any kind of pesticides. And it's pretty easy maintenance after the first year. Once the plants start to get established and really fill in, and they're very drought tolerant. So if you have a really hot summer, there's not a lot of maintenance. They will require watering at first, but after they're established, they shouldn't require a lot of water. So you want to think about plants that prevent erosion. So one thing that a former colleague of mine was always very knowledgeable about, and she always had such great advice, was to really think about those low-growing plants that are in among the taller plants. Select plants that have semi-evergreen leaves that are going to fill in that bottom of the rain garden, so that you have something in place there all winter, so you're not getting a lot of erosion. So really think of your garden as layers. Think about the plants with deep roots. But you can see in this picture, this was actually a bioswale that we planted, and it was the first year of growth. So the plants hadn't spread a whole lot yet that spring, but you could see the erosion coming in there from the yard. A lot of water was moving across that yard, really eroding that side of the swale. So you really want to think about what can really hold that soil in place at that very bottom level of the garden. Here's just two examples of plants that you could use in that situation. The Pacra aurea and the Carex there, Amphibola, both of those would be great choices for a semi-evergreen plant with those basal leaves that are really going to help to prevent erosion, suppress weed growth, and filter sediment. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the moisture zones. So typically there's technically 4 different zones in a rain garden. So the bottom of the rain garden at the most depressed spot there is the wet or moist zone. Those you really need to think about plants that you put in there that they can really tolerate being inundated for a period of time. Some plants cannot tolerate inundation at all. So you don't want to put something down in the bottom that can't stay submerged for like 24 hours. The moist zone then is zone 2, and then they can tolerate some inundation. Zone 3 would be the moist dry zone, don't have as wet of feet as the plants that you're going to put in that wet zone. And then 4, that zone would be very dry, where they're going to be dry most of the time. Really not going to be getting wet a whole lot other than during the rain, but that's what you want to put on the uppermost portion of the garden. Grasses and sedges have deep roots that will hold in the soil. So think about adding grasses and sedges in to the rain garden. You know, it may not have the big showy flowers, but they're really important plants that you can put into a rain garden. I've found that sedges really, really work great. In some of our gardens, they've just really filled in so well. And they also add a nice texture too, but definitely have an important part of holding that soil in place. And choosing plants. So where are you going to get your plants? So when you're planning your rain garden, you want to think about the plants that you have available to you or have access to. So I really like to use plugs when we do a rain garden project. A plug, you can see that's what's laid out on that picture on the right. So they're about 1 inch by 1 inch and then about 4 inches deep. And it's real easy planting. The plugs come in flats. You can maybe buy them wholesale or from another native source. You might be able to go to a native plant sale in your area where you can buy plugs. We recommend that you plant 10 to 12 inches apart, and that will really, really help a garden to fill in nicely if you plant dense. And you want the garden to fill in as quickly as possible. So you want to think about cost too. Plugs might be cheaper for you than using containerized plants. Container plants may be more expensive. You can see them planting here at a rain garden using some plugs on those berms there. I think that's little blue stem. And then, you know, you have containerized plants also. So it's really up to you what you have available to you to use, but those are just 2 different options. And you could always use seed too. Again, I would recommend a native seed. If you're going to use a native seed mix, then part of the issue is when it comes up, are you going to be able to identify what you plant? So if you use containerized plants or plugs, you could mark those plants so you know where, you know, what to look for when they're growing. Seed, it's a little bit harder and trickier to identify as the plants just start to grow. So again, plant very dense if you can, and you'll see that you'll have a greater success early on because the plants will really fill in pretty quickly. And here's just an example. I think this is within that first year of growth. The goal is to have the plants reseed, knit together, and hold that soil. But this was planted very dense with plugs, and it filled in very nicely that first year. So keep it simple. It's really easy to have way too many species in your garden, and that can be difficult to maintain. So keep it simple, use fewer species. again, really think about different textures and bloom times. But in a rain garden, that's about 875 square feet, 11 to 12 species would, be not all that you really need to have. You don't need to have like 20 to 30 different species, really makes it difficult with maintenance. Now, I will say, like with planting in a municipal space where maybe you're not doing the maintenance and someone else is doing it, I really do recommend fewer species because then it's easier to show them, what the species look like, and it's just easier for them to identify and pull weeds and not pull the wrong thing. So we've been developing some resources to help with that. And I'm a firm believer that if you don't maintain a project that you're putting in, it's likely to fail. So as Master Watershed Stewards put in projects, they do some maintenance. I really like here in York County, I like to follow our projects those first few years. One, we're learning about them as we go. But we're also doing the necessary maintenance to increase success. So it's very difficult to teach, let's say we do a rain garden at a township building or a park. It's really hard to teach the maintenance staff how to identify the plants. This could be a whole new territory for them. And so we've been developing these rain garden fact sheets to help with that, trying to put pictures of the plants at all different parts of their development. So as they're just coming up out of the ground, then as they're flowering, taking pictures of the leaves so they can identify the leaves, taking a picture late in the season, and taking seed photos so that they can learn and see the plants in all different seasons. So we do have this resource online. I think I'm up to 24 rain garden plants so far, but have a lot more to do. And also we'll be starting trees and shrubs. So this is a resource that we'll build upon, but you can go online and download the PDFs, print them out for yourself. And, if I'm doing this at a municipal park, I can print out the species that we're planting in that garden itself and then give the municipal staff just those fact sheets so that they can keep them together and it can hopefully help with maintenance in the end. So there's also plant characteristics on these fact sheets and then site conditions too. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with some examples. So I put 3 of the fact sheets in the wet to moist zone that I have done. So the blue flag iris, swamp milkweed, and cardinal flower. So on the fact sheets, you'll see, what can they tolerate full sun or partial sun, and that is documented, has the height of the plant. And then one of the characteristics that's on all the fact sheets is a little bit about the bloom. So the blue flag iris, for instance, has showy bilateral flowers. The swamp milkweed is a pink color. It's a favorite of pollinators. The cardinal flower has a striking bloom color. And then I wanted to show some different characteristics that we have, but I didn't want to put it all on each species here. So for the moist zone, I wanted to highlight for each species, we put the hydrologic zone on the fact sheet. So you can see like the great blue lobelia, it's in the moist zone. It's what it's recommended for in a rain garden, and it is inundation tolerant. So that is one that you could put in that wet zone of a rain garden. We also put for the bee balm here, I listed the salt tolerance. We put salt tolerance on all the fact sheets. Bee balm is not salt tolerant. So if you know that rain garden is going to intercept a lot of runoff from a roadway that is heavily salted in the winter, you might not want to use bee balm because you might lose it if it's getting a lot of runoff from the roadway. And then the New England aster here, I highlighted both the hydrologic zone and salt tolerance. So moist zone, limited inundation tolerant, so it can tolerate a little bit. and it has low to moderate salt tolerance. Wild geranium, here is the moist dry zone, 3 of the species from those zones. And here I was highlighting the leaves, just to show 3 totally different looking leaves on plants. So the wild geranium, the leaves are semi-evergreen and have 5 lobes, so that could help with identification. But knowing that it's semi-evergreen, you're going to have those leaves there from the plant, much further into the season than, let's say, something like Virginia bluebells, where the leaves just totally disappear after they bloom. The blazing star has the linear alternating grass-like leaves, so that's definitely a different textured plant that's really fun to have in a rain garden. And I love threadleaf blue star. Again, it's a great texture to have in the garden, and the leaves here, the very fine feathery foliage, actually turns golden in the fall. So you go from green to gold, which is a pretty cool feature of that plant. And I really like to use that in projects because it fills in so well, really is a dense plant and adds some fun texture and color. And then the dry zone plants, this is just 3 examples that you would put, up around the top edges of your garden. Butterfly weed. And here I included how the plant reproduces. So the butterfly weed self-seeds freely. It does die back each winter and resprouts from tubers in the late spring. It's definitely a slower plant to emerge, but it's a fun color to have in your rain garden. Blue-eyed grass, again, it's self-seeding and it's clump forming, but an early spring plant that you could have in there with some fun texture. And then purple coneflower, how does it reproduce? It is self-seeding. So I want you to think about plant availability as you're planning your garden. Where are you going to find your native plants? So what local sources? It's hard to find good native plants at some big box stores in the area. So you want to look at nurseries. You want to look around your county to see if your Master Gardener program has native plant sales. The Master Watershed Steward program has a native tree and shrub sale every August. The plants are then delivered in October. The conservation districts usually have native plant or tree sales. Definitely check out other conservation organizations that I maybe didn't mention. You could possibly do mail order. You might be able to find a broad species selection. A downside to that is you can't examine the quality of the vegetation that you're getting. And you definitely want to make sure that you're getting from a reliable stock and that it is native to your area. The DCNR has they have great resources online where to buy native plants. They even will highlight native plant sales in their state parks, have native plant societies and native plant nurseries. So check out their website for native sources. And after planting, we definitely recommend that you protect your investment. You want to be able to provide the maintenance that is needed for success. So think about that before you even start. How are you going to do the maintenance? Who's going to do the maintenance with you? Do you enjoy that? And we recommend after you plant that you only mulch that first year. I've filled in some mulch on some gardens that maybe had some heavy erosion, or they just weren't filling in real well that first year. I maybe put some mulch back in the garden just to try to keep that soil in place until we can get more vegetation established. But then the maintenance after that would be to cut back the vegetation just once. Well, here was my mulching slide, so I kind of got ahead of myself. But to cut back the garden's, just once per year, maybe in March. So you're going to be hand removing that vegetation. It's going to be up to you if you want to leave the vegetation on site or if you want to take it away. So there's a couple, you could do either. If you let it on site, you are going to be adding more nutrients there to the soil. So it's totally your choice of what you're going to do. If you do have an inlet or outlet structure that maybe is going to need to be cleaned out each year also, you want to remove the sediment that's building up in the inlets and outlets. And then you're going to want to replace plants that have failed. So you're going to know that first year, water as needed, weed as needed, and then replace plants that have not filled in. So at least in our projects, it hasn't been too bad. You might be even might be able to move plants from other parts just to fill in a little bit more in some sections. Year 2, again, you're going to be cutting back the growth in the springtime. Again, March is kind of what I recommend. Think about how you're going to do that too. Are you going to use a hand, like cut it back, just using clippers? If you're going to be using a mower, think about soil compaction. The more you're in there, the more you're going to compact that soil, which is going to cause it to fail more quickly. So that's not really too recommended. Maybe you could use a string trimmer or something to cut that vegetation back. Again, year 2 and after, you're going to be looking for the weeds, encourage reseeding, replacing plants again, and not adding additional mulch. So again, I'm not an engineer, so I've not done a lot with under drains and pipes and stuff like that in rain gardens. But if you do have those structures or components in your rain garden, you need to be able to maintain those. So if you work for municipal government or something and you are part of the maintenance staff, that is something that you would have to learn how to maintain. One thing that we found at Penn State and just doing this, for different organizations, different public lands, even at the university, there's a lot of turnover of maintenance staff. So it's really hard for them to learn or it's difficult to train staff to perform the required maintenance. I've had rain gardens in the city of York that were mowed down by city workers. So one thing is really to make that garden visible, maybe with a sign, even if you don't want to use permanent signs, maybe temporary signs, just explaining what it is to protect your investment. I did learn that, thinking that, well, these, depressed shaped gardens were so easy to identify. Each one had a tree in the middle. Vegetation was, tall, 3 feet tall in some places, and they got mowed down. So I learned at least put a sign in there that's temporary saying, hey, this is a rain garden. What's the purpose of it? Even if you can't afford to have a big sign. So after planting, think about this. Plants will rearrange over time according to their own needs. So they don't always stay put. So I put a picture here that included cardinal flower. It's a great, great plant to include in your rain garden, but it moves around and it's not going to stay where you put it. That's where identification comes in handy. So I know that in one of our rain gardens, I think I was pulling cardinal flower the first year because I was misidentifying it. So, and I feel like I know plants pretty well, but I was misidentifying. So it is tricky, but it's not always going to come back where you put it. So be flexible. So maybe you can't do a rain garden. Maybe you don't have the space. Maybe you can't help with one in a community. There are alternatives. One would be a downspout planter. Doesn't have to be a big plastic planter like this. We did this at a park in northern York County, but you could be creative with the kind of downspout planter that might be attractive at your location. Maybe a downspout garden. Maybe you don't have room for a big, gigantic rain garden, but you could put some native plants at your downspout where the water is flowing into your yard. Native plants would be a great solution there. And maybe you can't dig and don't have a great place just for drainage reasons for a rain garden, but any type of native garden would be beneficial. And just overall, just to end here, installing best management practices just have so many benefits. They decrease property damage. So if you're a homeowner, that could help save you money in the end. They improve health, improve water quality, provide excellent wildlife habitat, and putting in things like rain gardens can save money in the end. You're using less resources, so less time mowing. Lawnmowers produce a lot of pollution themselves, so you're spending less money on the fuel. You're also saving the air by mowing less, and you're using less chemicals. So there's a lot of benefits that enables you to go out and have more fun and not spend so much time behind a lawnmower. I wanted to share some resources here before we get to questions. So Penn State has a lot of resources online that can help you learn more about best management practices or how you can, implement these homeowner BMPs to help prevent or to help manage stormwater on your property. So we do have the Homeowner's Guide to Stormwater. Again, really walks you through how you can design and lay out based on the structures that you have around your property. So very useful resource there for homeowners. We also have a whole series called Stormwater Basics, and this is a ready-to-use educational toolkit for stormwater management. So this was actually created. There are small videos and articles that answer very common questions from local residents. They might call their municipality and say, hey, what is an MS4? We've heard about this MS4. What is it? So you can click on this what is an MS4 link. Will take you to a short article and a very short video describing and explaining what an MS4 is. Maybe you don't know what combined sewer overflows are. So it really is a resource we created that municipalities can help their residents learn more about all of these basic stormwater topics. And there's more to come. I'm doing one on rain gardens now. So we're always adding to this list of topics. And then we also have a resource called the Roadside Guide to Clean Water. So it's actually a guide that helps you recognize BMPs in your community. So if you're interested in learning about grassed waterways or riparian buffers or stormwater basins, this guide has articles and pictures of all of these different practices that are in place all around your community. And then we also did this watershed friendly certification program for homeowners in Pennsylvania. Well, not just homeowners, because we changed that to add small, like urban, just people who live in urban areas, maybe don't have even a property, maybe they're renters, but they could be watershed friendly in their community by the work that they do. So this certification is online. You can go to watershedfriendlypa.org, and the objectives, it's recognizing homeowners and citizens who are incorporating best management practices to their properties and to the community. So there's 4 main objectives. It's reducing stormwater runoff, reducing pollution, conserving water, and supporting wildlife and pollinators. So it's an online application that you complete. You actually will find out if you get certified after you complete it. I highly recommend to download the PDF of the application before you go through the application process, so that you know what questions are coming and you can have your, the size of your area all measured and just have an idea of what is going to be asked of you. So if you pass, you can get a sign or a window cling to basically to help to educate others. You have some bragging rights too, but it's mainly to make people aware of the great, great work that you're doing on your property or in the community to help improve water quality, create healthy habitats, and to protect our water resources. So you can connect with Penn State more if you want to, and go to Extension and sign up for all the topics that you might be interested in. You will get emails of upcoming webinars and all that good stuff. And just more resources. I already talked about that at the beginning, but videos, guides, online courses, articles, webinars, workshops. So that will conclude my presentation for tonight, and Beth and I can take questions. I'm so glad that we had so many people attend tonight. It's exciting that so many people have an interest in doing this kind of work. And if you've already implemented BMPs on your property, I just want to say thank you. It's great to see the work that's being done in the community to protect our water resources. So I will stop here and then handle
Jodi,
questions.
thank you. Thank
Yep.
you so much for a very informative presentation, and I've got a lot of comments here about the resources at the end and how valuable they are. And let me just put in a plug for the Penn State Extension efforts. Go to their website, sign up for their information. That's how I found Jodi. Jodi gave a webinar on this exact same subject, and I thought that it would be an ideal opportunity for Maria folks to learn more. And we have about 18 chat questions, Jodi.
Okay.
My colleague Joe Matisco is going to alternate with me on these questions. Some of them you may not have, or Beth, and Beth is going to chime in too. But some of them may take some research. So the first one is, it says, I was required to have a storm management system when building my house in 2019. All of my rain gutters go into a central underground stone basin sized for 1 inch of rain per hour. If I plant a rain garden over top of the stone basin, am I violating building code?
Well, so I will say I'm not an engineer. So I don't know, Beth, if you have any insight on this. That's something you might have to ask your local municipal staff first if it's allowable, and you don't want to create a problem with a system you already have.
Right, so I would say the same thing that you answered, which is that, first of all, you always want to check with your municipal codes, because those are all going to be different depending on where you live. And since this is statewide and possibly even beyond the state of Pennsylvania, those local codes are really important. And they may have even changed recently, even since you purchased your home. So you want to make sure what the current regulations are. And then the other thing is, if there's already a stormwater collection system there, I would be hesitant to construct a rain garden right there, because you may be interfering with what's in place. And that's, for instance, the reason that we call that 811, is so that we don't disturb existing utilities. So we also don't want to disturb existing stormwater management structures.
Thank you, Beth.
Joe, you want to get the next one?
Sure, and there is an additional comment in the chat that says that echoes that you likely have a stormwater easement over that storm management system. So yes, any modifications would need to go through your municipality, and that your recorded plans would probably have that information as well. So the next comment or question is that I have seen some rain gardens locally that look like small lakes, much deeper than 12 inches. What's up with that?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's so many different stormwater structures. So whether it's a different kind of retention basin or if it's specifically built as a rain garden, but again, a rain garden shouldn't technically be deeper than 12 inches in depth. But it could be like a naturalized basin that's being planted. And I think sometimes people use, the term rain garden for different structures like that. Anything to
The
add?
next,
Okay.
Beth, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that one thing to keep in mind is that the idea of these green stormwater infrastructures is kind of a moving target. It's something that we're learning about and that has been implemented fairly recently. And as Jodi noted in her slides, we have kind of changed our idea of how to manage that stormwater. So often when you see some of the older practices, they are over-engineered and maybe don't have exactly the same kind of design features as newer ones. So those may be residual from a prior way of thinking.
I will also add, if you see a feature like that is ponded for a long time, it's not functioning correctly. So one thing you'll find is these stormwater basins are mowed a lot by municipalities and stuff, and that's going to compact the soil and it's not going to drain, So I'm an advocate for planting native plants in these structures if it's structurally possible, and then that would help with that infiltration and keep mowers out so it's not compacting the soil.
Okay, the next question is more detail about silt and debris, keeping silt and debris out of incoming water to the garden. Seems like that could be a big problem.
Yeah, and I think that's where, design is gonna be changed, like where you have to be creative and possibly even change, or we learn as we go. Like, I if you use heavy rock and it's filling in with sediment, it's going to be a lot of work to get that rock cleared out and to dig that area out. And that's where you may need a big volunteer force or equipment that's able to remove that rock where you could dig that rock out. But it's definitely something that you have to think about when you're designing and building. And there's already old designs that I've seen that have failed, and I think we'll get better with the design as we keep doing this more and more. Beth?
So the follow-up to that is there a lifespan for a rain garden?
Well, it's going to want to fill in over time, just like a pond or a lake. It's going to want to go through natural succession, and if a lot of sediment is getting in there, it's going to fill in and over time. So again, there may be a time where you have to get more of that sediment out and kind of want to say start over or like do significant maintenance at a certain time. But I think if you stay on top of it, you could have a rain garden that will function properly for a good length of time.
Okay.
Beth?
Joe,
Yeah.
you want to get the next one?
Sure. Would arborist wood chips make a good top mulch?
We used wood chips before. Again, just make sure you know the source of those wood chips, and you don't want to bring in a seed source from all random homeowners in your community. If you know the source of the wood chips and that they're pretty much aren't going to have a lot of seed source in, I think it's a fine substitute for mulch.
Yeah. The next one is I have a large septic mound around 1,500 square foot and would like to cover the sides with pollinating plants to make it more aesthetically pleasing. Any recommendations on resources to determine what type of flowers or plants I could use? And probably this question came before all your last slides, Jodi, that's my guess.
Yeah, well, you really need to think twice before planting on a sand mound, because you don't want to mess up your sand mound structure. So it's not really recommended to plant those with vegetation that's going to have really deep roots. Now you'll find different, if you do some research on that, you'll find both sides, but I would say that's more controversial in the drainage area than the sand mound itself. I would not plant on the sand mound. One homeowner that I know that was considering that and did a meadow, it was suggested maybe to do clover on the sand mound. You just aren't going to want to plant the really deep rooted plants on the sand mound.
The
It'd be
next
an
one is
expensive fix.
the next one, Joe, is a universal problem.
Yeah, a couple of, oh deer. Yeah, what do you do about deer? What plants are resistant to deer?
Yeah, so on my fact sheets, I have some of that information. So I have some that are deer resistant. So if you do some research, you will find some that the deer don't like, and that's something that you might want to choose a species, like heavy plant that, those species if you are in an area that has a lot of deer. Now, we've had to fence in gardens in municipal parks, at least until they get established, because of the deer and also rabbits and groundhogs and all that good stuff.
So, but we don't put a fence around them, is that?
Like we did the one rain garden that I think you used at the very first slide to promote this. We had to fence that at first because it was just getting, and we just did a temporary. The water could still get into the garden. It was just like one of those unattractive orange fences, but hey, it saved the plants those first couple years.
Okay. We have a couple advertisements here from Monada Conservatory. Spring plant sale goes live on the 1st of February online at monada.org. And then there's also the York County's Master Gardener Native Plant Sale is Saturday, May 11th at John Rudy County Park. So those are two places that you will be able to get native plants for sure.
Yeah. And our native plant sale here in York County is just packed. And I know I left there this year just so excited again that so many people are there to get native plants. It's wonderful. So it's a great source, great place to get good sources of plants.
So Joe, you got the next one?
Yeah, there's a comment on no herbicides on nearby lawns, correct?
On what?
Nearby lawns, or I guess lawns adjacent to where you're putting in your rain garden.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that drift possibility too. If someone is, herbiciding an area close to a garden that you plant, we've even had that happen with farms and riparian buffers. So yeah, think about that. Think about location and maybe educating your neighbors about what you're doing on your property to help prevent that from happening.
And then there's just another comment. Sure. Leaving 12 to 18 inches of stem when cutting back provides nesting sites for native bees that nest in hollow-stemmed plants. The stems are quickly hidden by new growth. So just a comment there by.
All right, thank you. Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, and another comment.
Oh, go ahead.
What kind of gorgeous moth is that? In one of your slides, you must have had a.
It might have been a buckeye. It might have been a buckeye butterfly, a buckeye. That's
I saw a couple of comments that mentioned that common buckeye.
Yeah.
Nice pictures too that were commented. Excellent photographs.
When excavating the rain garden, make sure the soil is dry. Otherwise, the soil will be smeared and compacted and the drainage will be greatly reduced.
Yeah, Beth, do you have anything to add? You're the soil expert.
Yeah, you don't want to go and excavate when it's super wet because it will cause compaction, although you're removing that soil. But you also don't want to do it when it's too dry because then you also have a difficult time excavating. So maybe a few days after the last rain is a good time if you can time it that way.
Okay. A comment, I live in York, Pennsylvania. Where was the downspout planter installed? And is there a PDF on the extension's website on how to build or purchase one of those planters?
Yeah, I can provide that. That's at Roof Park in Fairview Township. We have two up there. I can provide we did a video on how to do that, and I'm not sure if it's posted on our website, but I think I didn't see everything in the chat, but I think I know that person is going to be in my next training, and I can hook her up with some of that info.
Okay, great.
What is Jodi's email? These resources are awesome. Well, your email is still showing, so
Oh,
it
it's on
shouldn't
the
be.
screen.
Yeah, it's on the screen. Another comment about the Buckeye. There are insects. You want to get this one, Joe?
Sure. There are insect larvae in the old stems of the plants. Is March too early to clean up these structures? I heard that you need to have 7 days of 60 to 70 degree weather, or take the stems and place them in a bunch.
Yeah, perhaps. I always tell our municipalities like sometime like before the end of March, because I feel like our growing season's starting sooner and sooner, and we want that new growth to start. But if it would help to save some of those insects, maybe keep the debris close by or on site, that may be a good idea. That
And
I'm
it's
not
going
an
to vary
expert.
by location as well, depending
Right.
on what area you're in. So the way that it was framed in the question is a really smart strategy, which is to think in terms of the conditions of where you live. Has it been warm
Right.
enough for at least 5 days? Then you may want to start cutting those back. And you can even create brush piles from the stems and debris and leave those in a less unappealing area.
Okay. Want to snag the next
Go
one,
ahead,
Chuck?
Joe. Go.
Okay,
Is
sure.
there a program for municipalities too for certification? I guess that's related to certification of watershed that
So
competency.
yeah, so we've tried to produce some resources to help with that, but the Chesapeake Bay landscaping, CBLP professionals. There are trainings out there, and I did the CBLP level 1 training, and there were a lot of municipal staff in that training, which was good to see. So that's to train people, how I use some of the pictures from that training, actually, at some of the rain gardens we went to. So there are trainings out there. You just have to look, and yeah.
And we
Yeah, lots of
encourage
thank yous.
people. Oh, sorry. I wanted to say we encourage people to work together in a municipality or neighborhood if they want to do those watershed friendly certifications all together, because then that maximizes the benefit of all those practices being together in a small area. I put that in the chat, how you can get to that.
Okay.
So the other comment was you said not to put a rain garden under trees, but a few slides showed rain gardens with trees in them. Can you plant
Right.
some small trees and shrubs in a rain garden?
Yeah, you definitely can plant trees in them. It's just, I would not dig under a grove of trees to plant a rain garden, because those roots are already established and functioning well. I think the greatest thing you can do for water quality is simply to plant trees. So if you plant a tree in a rain garden, you need to think about that garden is going to change over time, because it's going to produce shade at some point, not at first, but it's going to change what can grow underneath it. So, we'll go through a succession, and you need to be able to change maybe the vegetation that's there. But definitely, if you can, if you want to have a tree or some shrubs in there, the pictures I showed from Stroud had trees in their rain gardens. yeah, go for it. I just wouldn't, you know, plant under a grove of trees that like try to establish a rain garden per se. It's going to be hard to dig because you're going to be hitting the roots and stuff. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah, there's another comment about please don't modify any existing stormwater management, best management practices without discussing with your municipality.
Right, and that's where it would be different than a rain garden per se, but if it's an existing stormwater structure, you should check with your municipal staff before you plant a tree, because you don't want to mess up any structure that might be underneath. If there's any kind of under drain, you would want to get confirmation and approval on that first.
And there's another question. Is there any kind of garden alternative topic for a property with wetlands or areas that do not perk?
Yeah, so I think, if you can't do a rain garden, if it's too wet, like it's not draining, planting trees is a great alternative. There's a lot of shrubs and trees with very wet feet that would be great. You could live stake in that area. Even if it's not perking well, you could do native plants of some sort. I just wouldn't try to construct a depressed rain garden in that space.
Okay, lots of
but-
thank yous. Lots
Many
of
thank
great
yous.
presentations, wonderful work. Any other questions here, Joe? I don't.
Let's
Also,
see.
landscapers. Oh,
You know-
so it says also landscapers and municipal land managers, Sergeant and the Master's Watershed will be holding a free native plant landscaping and water garden training workshop in 3 parts of Pennsylvania in March. And there's a link here to that training, to more information.
Thank you, Beth.
And then just one other question. Can a rain garden be successful with shrubs rather than flowering plants and grasses, like the wet loving things like dogwoods and willow? I think you already answered that.
Yeah, I think those ones I had on at the beginning like Stroud has a lot of those. They have a lot with trees and shrubs in, which are different. So you can be creative and plant the types of plants that you enjoy and would benefit the most from.
And then the last comment question is, will this video become available? And I believe, Jodi, you said that we could post this on our YouTube channel?
Sure. Yep.
So the answer is yes, and it will be available in a few days through our YouTube channel, which you can access through our website. And with that, I'm going to just say a huge thank you to Jodi and Beth. We still, after a half hour of Q&A, have 100 people on this call, which is absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your enthusiasm for providing opportunities to do something useful for our environment and our planet.